Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. This is, I know where they are now. What do I do? Something along the lines of that. This is a math workshop, and you're here with tour guides Ben Hazard and Sally Parkinson. Ben's the superintendent of early years and elementary program at Lambton Kent, and Sally's an instructional coach. They're both Lambton Kent folks. Sally's been madly packing, moving, and fishing furniture out of the river the past few days.
And bats.
Yeah.
And bats.
Having just moved into a new home a few days ago. And they're both joined by Greg Van Bunderen, wonderful radio voice guy. And he's been touring all over this summer, notably out east with his wife. And he's been using Lawson's multiplication continuum during the past school year to support his students' learning, and is looking forward to asking questions and commenting on his experiences. I'm Rod Lucier. I'm here in Komoka. I'm going to go duck behind the curtain by turning my microphone and camera off, and I'm going to leave it to our presenters. Let's have a good session.
Thank you, Rod. So we are really excited to have everybody here. People sign up. We had a lot of people sign up after our initial group had signed up. So we're really excited, and we hope everybody enjoys the session this morning.
Yeah, and thanks for taking time out of the precious time of August. You know, these are
The last bit, yeah.
the last
hurrah.
So for folks to pause and give us, an hour and participate with us, we really appreciate that. So thank you. We know that there are really important things that happen at this time of year with people that we love and time to recharge. So thank you. We're really hopeful that we'll have hopefully a great session today, but we really want you to engage and participate with us.
Yeah, and that leads us to our next slide there. We're using the hashtag LKCross, which is for multiplication, because we're focusing on multiplication today. And then we're also using the hashtag LK launch, which has been, 19, which has been for the whole week this week. But we'd be interested if you tweet out where you're coming from, where you're listening in from. Can you hear it?
We're getting a few comments here, so it's difficult to hear you, Sally.
Lots of echoes with me.
What if you try to?
It's a little bit better now.
Yeah.
Do you want to try to jump in on your iPad?
I can, yeah.
And I can take the next few slides. Will we do that?
Okay,
Yep.
So we're just going to talk about the chat on the side here, eh? That we want everybody to...
So this is who we are: Sally and Greg and
Morning.
You gotta say more.
That's right. That's right.
And what we thought we'd do is, and after today, we're gonna put a couple tweets out. So follow in on the Twitter chat that Sally just mentioned. But we thought we'd start here and just encourage everyone to participate in the chat and type something in, which is when you have a challenge, what helps you persevere? So just think about that for a second, a little minute of think time, and then if you can just open up the chat and type that in, and Greg's gonna share some of those answers. We have London Catholic School Board and Vince McDonald. So great to have you here, Vince.
So first response from Jana, knowing that you don't need to have the answer immediately.
Yes.
That's a good one.
That's a good one to remember.
Yeah.
Because I'm probably not going to have the answer.
So Jen, talking it out with others. Oh, they're coming in quick now. Talking with other teacher and sharing ideas with others. Have a buddy to check in with.
Friends help me persevere with Rod. He's in with that.
There you go. Oh, taking a break and coming back refreshed. That's a good one too.
Yeah. Mobilizing knowledge from Vince so that parents are engaged, that students lead the learning. Taking a break and coming back refreshed.
Yeah, that helped me this week. Leave the pile in the garage and go to the kitchen.
That's right.
Mike Adam, the vice principal here at Sir John Moore, says, reach out to your supports, knowledgeable others. When I have a challenge, Carolyn says, I need time to think out loud. We'll read the chat to you, Sally. Is the audio better for Sally? Time to think, says Mel.
Yeah. Still says can't hear her.
I guess I'm not presenting today.
She's just leaving.
Really? You can't hear me?
I can hear you. It's just a little bit lower. I think the other mics are just a little bit
Sounds like I'm underwater. How's that? Maybe if I hold the mic by my mouth. No? No comment?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sally.
Okay.
It's just not quite as loud, that's all.
Is it? No, that's for my sound.
That's for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I'll try and talk loud. See if that helps. So this image reminded me of something Heather Ward had said to me. I was a little anxious about this session and just presenting online, and like I've read and found some information and I tried things out with teachers, but like by no means are we experts on this. We spent some time investigating this year, and we've learned a lot, and that's how we've come up with this session today. It's, we know where our students are at in multiplication. We've been able to identify what they're doing, but then what do we do when they get stuck? And so that's the challenge. And so we've learned some things from Heather Work in some sessions she presented this year to us in June. So basically, I just put this up here so that we can, I'm coming to it saying that I'm not an expert, but I'm wanting to investigate this, and I may not have the right answers, and my answer may be different in June next year. But here's some things that we're thinking of that we'd like to try, and we're interested in hearing what you are trying or things that you're questioning, just so we can have a really productive discussion today. I like when people join in the chat, and Greg's here to help us with that. He's going to, if you have any questions, he's going to ask us the questions. So, so this is just up here to say, let's have a productive discussion today. You don't have to get it right. You just have to get it started.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're going to kind of talk about kind of 5 things about I know where they are and what do I do now. And I think that's the thing is that, sometimes how do we persevere? It's difficult for students at times to persevere, and it's how do we help students move forward? So we're going to talk about kind of 5 things. First thing, Sally and Greg, is make sure that I understand where they are on the continuum, so I kind of know where they are in their learning path.
Yeah, and we're going to look at that continuum.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk about providing a more efficient path or next step. So, students might be stuck in a way that's not as maybe efficient. So how do we kind of provide a better path for them through? And then building their mathematical strength. And we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of like, there's times when you're looking for the next step, and then there's times to pause and get stronger on what we're doing currently. And one of those ways we can do that is use a model to show thinking, a way to be stronger with that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a number string to find a better path. So that's the path and the journey that we're going to hopefully take on in the next 45 minutes or so. Looks like you went hiking this summer there, Sally. Yeah, Greg.
So you cut through that log, do you think? But like, this is why we have this image, because like there's a worn down path. It's a path that we would know, so we would follow that path, and it looks like somebody's gone to great lengths to make sure that that path is accessible. So like, even when it's not the easiest route, they've stayed on that path. They cut through logs, and they've done a lot of work. So that's what we want to talk about today, is that sometimes in multiplication or any operations, anything we do actually, we follow the way we know, and then we don't get exposed to other things. So this forest could have some really interesting things in it, maybe a river beside it or something, and you're not going to see it, right? So same thing with our students in multiplication.
Yeah. So we're talking about of our LKDSB math journey for those who are joining from other boards. I've got some London Catholic folks here today and others. So, you know, we really focused on how do we kind of know something in a narrow piece with the number sense and operations and know that well. So we use the Alex Lawson continuums from her book, What to Look For. There's a bunch of grayed out boxes that she didn't talk about because that resource was K-2. So we actually kind of put those boxes in permanent ink. And so we've got it using kind of K through 8 in our district. So that's the operations and math. And then it goes to understanding students. Hey, Sally?
Yeah, so we use that textbook, or not textbook, I don't know,
Resource. Yeah, resource.
We use that resource to identify all the different strategies, and then we went to look at our students. So we were spending a lot of time making their thinking visible so we could really make sure we understood them and where their thinking was. And then, now sometimes change with my voice. No?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds louder.
Much better.
Okay. Thanks, Ron.
Much better. Yeah.
The man behind the scenes.
That's right.
Okay, so we worked on making their thinking visible so that we can really understand where our students at. When we understand where our students at, then we can support them from where they are. And that is going to make their learning so much easier for them.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to support them on their next step, and that's where we come to our roadmap here. And this is the continuum that we talked about that we've been using from Lawson. This is the multiplication and division one. There's also an addition and subtraction one.
So Greg, you use this a little bit in your class throughout the year, or you used it in your class throughout the year?
Yes. And I was exposed to it because I was fortunate enough to have Sally for off and on for 6 weeks. I think the first mistake, if I pick out something, is that I thought this had to be linear.
Yeah.
So what does that mean there, Greg? What are you trying to say there?
So if I'm looking at it based in colors, if I'm looking at the working with numbers in the green section, I thought you had to work your way across, but there's multiple strategies within the green that could be very efficient, or you could be using multiple strategies within one problem.
So it's that whole idea, I think, of like there's, well, the trail that we just saw, right? The hiking trail. There's a bunch of different trails that can get us to the end goal. And the way to go about that might be different based on the problem, the numbers, all of that. So that's one way, like there's different trails. Did you notice this? We've noticed this a couple times, is that when we get larger numbers or more complex things happening in the work, it's not just that there's different ways it goes. It's like we go backwards on continuous. And if we go back, we got to kind of get back to like skip counting or using some trial and error before we can kind of find a new path. It's like we go back to what we know as students. So this is the continuum we use. And then Sally, you've got an example that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, so we want to talk about efficiency and sophistication here. So
okay,
what does efficient mean?
Hold on.
We're
gonna do a live on switch for Sally.
Yeah, just to further entertain the audience, there seems to be something loose about that cable, and either where the cable is connecting into the device or the cable. I think it might be the
we'll just deposit this in the trash.
The audio input. Maybe just track that.
Is that better?
Yeah, that sounds okay.
So efficient means using the least cognitively demanding process to find the solution. So one that's not going to pull a lot of chat.
So I just want to make sure when you lean towards Ben, it goes in his microphone just a little bit.
Here, go stay as far away as possible.
So, yeah.
How's that?
Yeah, that's good. Go ahead, Sally. And audience members, thanks for sticking with us. This is real live broadcast. Go for it.
Okay. So we're talking about efficiency and that we want our students to use strategies that are not demanding on the amount they can hold in their brain. And so we want it to be not demanding, and also we don't want it to be time consuming. So whenever you get different numbers, it could be that there's a different strategy that could be more efficient, less demanding on their brain to hold those numbers. And then we want to talk about sophisticated. So as we go, you're going to see what we mean by that. So we're going to look at this first example of a student solving 4 times 3.
So we want you to be thinking about how are they solving it?
Yeah. And we're going to have somebody chat in to tell us what the strategy that's being used. I think Kelly's here. She might be able to tell us. Oh, I see the little dots happening on the red ones.
So we'd like you to go into the chat and type in what strategy do you think that student was using?
Or is there more than one?
Ah, that's true. Yeah. Subitize.
Yeah.
Well, we're allowing some think time. There's a question about what are the links in the continuum? The links in the continuum that you're seeing here link to the elementary program blog. And what happens there is if you click on the links, it's a PDF actually, and there's little video clips that explain what each one of these strategies are and how you might see them in the classroom.
Yeah, it really cuts down on time for teachers if they want to just quickly look at that video instead of having to go to the book and read it up. And the book will help, but the video would just be a quick little.
So subitize and fair sharing.
Any other ones?
Counting all.
Counting all. Yeah.
After making the 4 groups, Mary Lynn says, I think they counted by ones to get the final answer.
Yeah, that's what they did. So they were in that direct modeling and counting phase, right?
Yeah.
And they had to use counters to share them out to make groups of 3. They started with 4 groups, and then they put 3 in each. Yep. So they're modeling and counting by ones.
And so we could circle other things on this continuum too, like people have identified. There was subitizing happening. There was making into those groups and that fair sharing. There's lots of those pieces.
Yep. And it would help if you're hearing a student and seeing what they're doing. Yeah. Like seeing their face, that helps. So to this student, this is the most sophisticated and the most efficient strategy they have to solve 4 times 3, because that's where they're at. That's their understanding. So that's where they're at on the continuum. So we know where they're at, and now what will we do next? So we're going to look at another example here.
So we would have thought that student, we might have moved them into like a skip counting kind of idea.
Right. So Jana agrees with your point that listening to what students say is very important.
So we can see there, they skip counted. And that's definitely more efficient and sophisticated than the modeling and counting by ones. But the student who was modeling and counting by ones isn't using that because that's not their level of understanding. And so before we get them to the skip counting, there's some work that would need to happen.
And if they're doing that well, then in this case, we've thought maybe repeated addition might be a pathway through. Would you have used that, Greg?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, children often move into that repeat addition on their own once they realize, oh, I have 4 units of 3, and I get 3, 6, 9, and then they could say, oh, well, I could do 3 plus 3 plus 3, right? They will repeatedly add, especially when they get numbers they don't notice how to skip count by, like 7s. They might have 7 plus 7 plus 7, start adding them up. And then that gets a little challenging when they get to bigger numbers.
And they get kind of in this path. And sometimes that's really helpful, but other times, well, it can be a bit of a rut.
Yeah, and we have to figure out how to block that path and nudge them onto a different path so that they can get comfortable on that new path.
Yeah, there's a comment here too that sometimes when you get into bigger numbers, students revert back. So totally agree to those
Yes.
less efficient strategies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because that's where they're comfortable.
Nothing
right?
wrong
And
with
they can
that.
work
Yeah.
with those numbers, right? In that way.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I skip
Yeah,
count all
agreed.
the time.
Those are big numbers. I go back to what I know I can answer.
Mhm. So to think about efficient and sophisticated, we're going to look at 2 examples here.
So 6 times 7?
Right? Yep. That's a harder one to do. That's the 7, right? That we can't skip count by 7s.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a delay in yours? Because it's just on mine. So now it looks like the student was slowing down and they're making some little tick marks here.
So one was skip counting.
Right, there's skip counting.
Yeah.
I have to be a little bit closer to Ben because my iPad is delayed. Okay, so they were skip counting in the last one, and then they had to go to counting rhythmically. And then they did 6 times 5 and 6 times 2 by decomposing the 7. And then they were able to take those 2 products that they ended with, the 30 and the 12, and then join them.
So Kelly's saying playing math games with a friend's a really great way to develop the strategy. It's a way to pause and kind of strengthen what's actually happening.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So here we're seeing the decomposing a factor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something new in the continuum that actually has just been added, is that in the research that Alex Lawson from Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, she realized that in the multiplication and division continuum, there was a strategy that had a lot of legs. And a lot of legs was decomposing a factor and getting very strong with decomposing a factor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in that second example, they're decomposing, but they're also using their 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also using their familiar facts, because maybe the 5 times is familiar facts to them, or the multiplying by 2, the doubling is familiar to them. So if we think about the first example where there was skip counting and some counting rhythmically at the end, that was probably the most efficient and sophisticated strategy that child had. But then when you go to this one, the 6 times 7, they're not going to see this strategy of decomposing or partial products here that we're using familiar facts. They're not going to find that efficient because they won't understand it. They haven't spent time developing it. And how do we get them to that decomposing the factor and using familiar facts? So that's kind of the challenge when we get stuck on that path.
And like Greg said earlier, wasn't just a linear path. There's a few different arrows, Greg.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at this with the using 5 times and using familiar facts, those are both almost essentially the same strategy. So if the 5 times table is comfortable for that student, then that's already a familiar fact for them, right?
That's right. So we will start with our students' understanding to build a new understanding, a brand new path, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to use models and strings/number talks, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. There are lots of other things you could do besides these 2 things, but these are the 2 things we're going to focus on today. We talk about patterns and generalizations, games we spent a lot of time on this year, problem context, exploring key ideas. We're going to focus on these 2.
So the question here is, maybe in the chat, think about a time outside school or your classroom when you have had to do that idea of either get better at a skill or find the next step. Right now I'm working on a run I'm about to do, which is going to be an issue. And I have to get really good running around 8K repeatedly. So instead of running farther or adding to it, Last weekend, I ran a bunch of 8K segments back to back to back just to get better on the strength of it. That strategy I need to get better at. I didn't go to my next step of a harder run or any other complexity. But so where in your life do you have any examples of where you would probably strengthen what you're currently doing or that kind of next step training?
Oh, I have an example. Like in the winter, I've always wanted to play hockey, and I never grew up playing. So I played a lot of ball hockey, so I was always pretty good with the stick.
Yeah.
But I joined the beginner men's hockey league.
Yeah.
And I'm getting left behind because I don't know how to stop.
Oh.
So my goal for the next little while is stopping.
Yeah.
Just learning how to stop.
Yeah, you're not going to the stick handling class.
No, not worried about that.
You're in the stopping class.
That's right.
And we have some comments,
go ahead.
okay. So I'm thinking of, I learned to play the piano when I was a kid, and like I didn't go very far, but my mom gave us her piano.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, I'm going to start taking piano again. And I'm going to be like, that's what I want to do. I really want to be able to play fluently.
Yeah.
But no, it hasn't happened. And I'm stuck. Shantima offered to teach me because she is an awesome piano player. But I need to actually spend some time.
What does Shantima not do?
I know. She's incredible. So I need to spend some time actually practicing. Otherwise, I'm going to get nowhere.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to happen. I just don't have the time. And you got to put the time in.
Apparently, Rod struggles with the short game in golf.
Yeah.
I can attest to that.
I feel like we're finding connections here. Like my son could teach you to stop. You could teach my son to play guitar. Rod, you can connect with my husband.
There you go.
That's right. Rod, you got some golf lessons coming up.
I can get a free specialist tennis course from Rod and trade off with golf lessons.
So the models.
Okay, so you're wrong. Okay, I'm just going to read this because Pam Harris has done a good job at defining what we need to think about here. So I've got some reading to do for you for a minute. So a model is a representation of your strategy. It might also be the tool used to actually do the computation. They have many different meanings and interpretations, but for our purposes, we're going to refer to models as representations of our strategies. Pam has a site, Math is Figureoutable. It's kind of neat, so you might want to check that out. But she points out that student thinking can be made visible and accessible to everyone by using models. And students can consider other students' strategies when they see the model being used. They can comment on it, they can dissect it, and compare for efficiency. So these models really help students access the math.
Yeah. Models are helpful, and fingers are an okay model. There's times when fingers work. That's a great example of models. Manipulatives to model our work. There's other ones we have here. Have you used any of these ones, Greg?
Sally actually came and gave us an extensive demonstration on the tiles, and the students for multiplication using the tiles, it was great. Mm-hmm. But once we tried to move on to the open array, that threw them through a loop.
Yeah.
So that's when we had to work backwards.
Yeah.
We tried to jump too quickly.
Yeah. So once they understand that using an array with tiles, then we can slowly progress to the open array. Yeah. And same thing with a number line. Once they understand a number line, like the bottom right-hand corner here, then we can move to the open number line. But if you move too fast, like Greg said, which is a perfect example, you lose students, and you don't want to do that. You got to pay attention to when they're ready.
Yeah, we have a comment here that students need the concrete before they move to the abstract.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's right. So this is an image from Marion Small. It's called Eyes on Math. And the PDFs are free. And actually on the end of the slide deck, there's a link. So if you wanted to access those. But this one, you can see that the students multiplying in groups of it reminds me of the circles and stars game.
Yeah.
Where they roll the dice and then they represent the circles and then they roll the dice and that's the number in each
And looking at this, I'm reminded of that first video that you showed, Sally, where we had, groups and we counted. And this has a little more sophistication. We've got some isolated icebergs with 2 penguins.
Right.
Yeah.
But in many ways, it's going to be a count all or a skip counting or
Yeah.
maybe even repeated addition. So we're kind of back in our sophistication, maybe lower sophistication and efficiency levels.
Yeah.
But certainly a way to kind of begin or to maybe practice some of that understanding.
Yeah, I see with the penguins here, if you had the students are able to pick up the 2, then they would notice that within that group of 4, there's 2. So they might go from counting by ones to, each iceberg has 2 sets of 2. And then might do 2, 4, because they can skip by 2s. Yeah. So a stronger model that's going to take your students much further is the array. And that's what we see here with this image. I like how the question up here says, how does this picture help you see? There are lots of ways to figure out 7 times 6, because you can see that there are 7 rows going across, but then the columns have been broken into 4 and 2. So they've taken that 6 and they've decomposed it into 4 and 2. And so I don't think that's the most efficient split for me, because the 4s, like if I was, struggling with counting those 4s, maybe I would do a split of 5 and 1. So 7 times 5 and then 7 times 1.
But the idea of organizing this into an array provides a lot more legs for this strategy and for this model, where the other would be effective based on where students may be. Now they can move forward, and like students need to see the concrete before they move to the abstract. And then the multiple representations and the connections between the representations, like Pam shared, is also important.
The penguin example, the groups of, that's going to make most sense to students when they're first understanding multiplication. And then we want to move them over to the array eventually.
Well, it's nice with a picture like this, you get, like it says in the chat here, multiple entries. So kids at every level can participate.
So like we said earlier, this is where we thought this model might be among other places, because there could have been some skip counting and as well within there, where once we kind of moved over into the array, well, there's other things that could be. It could have been modeling and counting by ones, or putting them in composite groups and counting by ones.
I've seen that. They're in the array and they're still counting by ones.
So it can be many ways. That's why it's important to know, so how did you solve it? But decomposing a factor, we know that's got some legs to it. That's really going to be a powerhouse strategy. And this might be a way to kind of entry point or begin that process. And I love the point in the chat. Students need to see that we often use different strategies depending on the question. I remember Pam sharing once about her brother who's in construction using all these different strategies to solve math, depending on the context, depending on the numbers, depending on his knowledge. So it's not just the standard algorithm. How do you solve that problem when you don't have paper and pencil? You need to have strong mental models.
So we're talking about that progression here with the smiley faces and the circles. That's where students are going to start with their understanding. Then we can even use that equal groups of to say, let's put these groups into rows. And now we have 3 rows with 4 smiley faces in each. And then once they're doing that, then maybe we can transition over to that grid model, which is like the area model. And then later to the open array. So like Greg said, we're not going to jump to that open array too fast, because then we're going to lose them. So we're going to develop that understanding the array. And once we do that with smaller numbers and they're really understanding it, then we can move into the bigger numbers.
This would be like a multi-year thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like jumping from
yeah.
that circle to the open array, Sally. Like, I'm feeling a little inadequate. Like, that I wouldn't be able to do that. Like,
no, like
my students did not jump that fast.
Yeah,
No.
like our grade 1s, 2s, 3s in that equal groups and transitioning into the first array with the actual pieces. And then into that grid area model 3, 4-ish. and then moving into that open array. And
Yeah.
like Greg had a 5-6. And if they were learning these arrays from younger on, that's just going to be such an easier
Right.
natural progression, right? So when we're looking at arrays, that first factor is usually the number of rows, just to help communication in the class. And then the second factor is the number of columns, the number in each row, right? And then in the middle, I'm just going to get Ben to show. So that was the rows. He's not doing a good job on his.
I've been relegated to the
over.
back seat. Sally just took control of my computer, everyone.
So then in the middle, so we have the 3 and the 4 on the open array too, and then in the middle is our 12. That's the product. And actually this is really useful with division too, that array model. Yeah. Okay. So once your student has the understanding of the arrays, then we can maybe move over to grid paper.
Yeah.
Right? And we've seen Heather work doing that in the session in June. And it's really flexible because they still have the little squares to work with. And I think this would have helped Greg and I this year. They can make some cuts wherever they want and work with that grid paper. Yeah.
Kelly's talking about loving to use a picture at the start of every math lesson before a math talk to get students talking and seeing math in everyday life, as well as getting them to share their thinking and strategies. And it's another way to communicate. So then the language can develop around the pictures. So there may be a common understanding what we're seeing, but the way we're using our language needs to develop and to kind of push our thinking forward in a more sophisticated ways, which is what Sally's just shared with these little smiley faces, and then you see the grid.
Math is visual. Somebody has a site called that.
Somebody trademarked that.
Yeah.
Well, they did.
Yeah.
Gives kids confidence too, because they can all jump in at their different multiple entries, right?
Yeah. Okay. So we can use that array to start decomposing a factor, make life easier for these kids.
Powerhouse strategy.
Yes, the BMW. Or, well, I don't know. We had a conversation about the BMW to me is the Toyota because that's what I like. So it's the Toyota
All right.
models for us. But there are other things that we can use when we're doing the model. So as you'll see later on, there's the number pieces by Math Learning Center. And it's not an app. You can get it as an app, but you can just use it as a web-based application and makes it really easy to move those pieces around and build these arrays. Graph and grid paper, tiles, and also Cuisinart rods, which we're going to see in a second here. Okay, so we're going to go slow through this.
All right.
Don't tap too fast here.
See, I got a moment to tap, and now I am being told to.
Yeah, slow down. Okay. So if we were going to use that grid paper like Heather did, these are pictures of the actual grid paper that we were using with her. So we said to our students here, can you create an array that's 48 times 12? And on the top image there, that's the 48 times 12. And then we said, make a cut to make it simpler to calculate. So we're going to teach them about distributive property. We could do doubling and halving with this. We could look at 10 times. So to start though, you just might let the students to make the cuts that make sense to them. So in the bottom example, this person took the 48 that would have been in each row and cut it in half. So now the person would have 12 times 24 and 12 times 24. On this next example, click again.
Trying not to click too fast.
This student took the 12 and broke it into 4 groups of 3. Right? So we can look at these examples and then students can see that students might go about it differently. Like this student did the 4 chunks of 3, right? So 3 times 48, 3 times 48, 3 times 48, 4 times, right?
Yeah.
And one more, I think. Oh.
So then this moves it into the array model.
Right. And I just want to say, like, why we have this strategy, this open array here. It's because those examples that we've seen of the splitting that they were doing weren't that efficient.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so those examples can be a good discussion in the classroom to say, is this an easy way to calculate? And
Mhm.
how could we calculate this in an easier way? And so to me, I would look for my 10 times because I like that.
Yeah.
So 10 times 48 and then 2 times 48.
I was just thinking how difficult that, like 3 times 24,
Yeah,
8
those were-
times would
Yeah.
just be like, oh, I'd lose track real fast. This one, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, thank God. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I can do 10 times 48.
So those were sophisticated strategies using the
Yeah.
model, breaking it apart,
Yeah.
but not efficient.
Not
and so
efficient.
this is sophisticated and efficient.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
is 10 times 48?
480.
Greg, we're going to challenge you here. What's 2 times 48?
Anybody get the wrong answer?
Anybody else?
Anybody else? You good? You good?
96. So you can just see how you can use that grid paper
So
to understand the distribute property, to use these strategies using 10 times, 5 times partial products.
this might have been better if it was a two-way arrow on the screen there, Sally, because the connection between parcel products back to decomposing the factor,
Yeah.
like it's flexible
Yeah.
thinking.
So connected. Yeah.
It's so connected, and you know, and being able to move back and forth is
Mhm.
one of the key ideas.
Okay, so we've got some work for the audience.
All right,
We're at 10:42.
we got 3 minutes, loads of
So we're not
time.
going
Right.
to talk about strings today, but hey, maybe we can have
Be
another
ready.
session
Yeah,
and
we'll
talk
do
about-
another one about strings maybe.
Okay. So let's watch this. Oh no, it's not a video, just an image. So what's going on with these students, the student who's doing this work? 7 times 16. What strategy is this student using? Audience members.
So I see 16 plus 16.
And then you get your answer and then add 16 more.
Is it repeated
we-
addition?
Oh,
Who is
Rod.
talking?
Like that wasn't me.
Bingo! Is it repeated addition?
What do you think? Is there another strategy that they could be using?
Well, we see doubling in the comments.
16 plus 16.
Oh, they
It's a
want us to go
double.
back to the continuum so we can take a
Oh,
look.
go back.
Yeah.
Sure.
Probably a good point.
Nice job directing us, audience.
We're just caught up with somebody using the mic and being
I
excited.
just
Yeah,
want to know
who was
who
it?
used the microphone. Was that Pam or was that who was that? I want to know.
It was Lisa, actually.
Lisa.
Oh.
Yay,
That was someone who
Lisa.
hasn't spoken. This is
Prize
Lisa.
in the mail.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much
What
for
are you
All right.
engaging.
Welcome, Rod.
That's outstanding.
The digital conference is over.
Drop the mic.
Oh no, I think Ben should send a tray of treats to your staff for chiming in, Lisa.
I'm at High Park, just saying.
High Park. Okay.
Great
Thank you,
idea.
Lisa from High
Great,
Park.
great idea. Sally,
Put
treats.
Ben on the spot in these sessions. Okay,
So
so
lots of repeated addition.
yeah, let's go with repeat addition. So let's say that your student is using repeat addition, and that's what they're using all the time, and it's really not efficient. So what are we going to do? Let's say they don't rely on their 10 times, and maybe we could develop this. So they understand an array with friendly numbers first.
Yeah.
And they're using a repeat addition. So now let's help them make sense of more complex number. Let's make it easier. We're going to look at the 10 times and the partial products. And we're going to use Cuisenaire rods and models to do this, which is the array. Which is this is getting a little more abstract, right? Because there's when we do this activity and we're using Cuisenaire rods, we can say, okay, let's solve 7 times 16, and you have to use the orange rod. How are you going to solve it otherwise? So here they're doing 7 times 10, and then the blue is the value of 6. And so then we can ask the kids, what do you notice? Get them to talk about the 10 times. What is the value of the orange section? And they're going to say 70. Well, how'd you know that so quick and easy? Because we know our 10 times and we're going to rely on them. So then we might say to somebody, can you explain what she's saying? Just to improve the listening and the dialogue in the class. Okay, next one. So then we could give them another example. Can you create 4 times 18? Like stay here, practice, strengthen, like you said.
So it's interesting, and we want to do the strings at another time, but
Yep.
here we're using smaller numbers,
Yep.
building confidence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm going back to the example, if Greg's okay with it, about not stopping in hockey, to
Right.
like be learning that in the middle of a game is
It's a little bit of
Yeah.
a sore spot, but
Sorry,
yeah, that's okay.
needling you on that one. But to do that in the middle of a game is probably not the time to be learning. The idea to slow it down in a more friendly environment, practicing, trying where there's some success, means that when we get to the more larger numbers to the game, then we may be able to do that more efficiently.
Mm-hmm. So using these Cuisinart rods is forcing them to use the 10 times because we're saying you have to use the orange.
Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of times in education, the Cuisinart rods sit in buckets and people don't know how to use them. So this is a great
They're
example.
so useful. Yeah, they can be really useful. So here we've had the child focusing on some friendly numbers.
Yeah.
And they know a repeat addition. We're moving them on beyond that. And we're having that intentional practice, like you said.
Yeah.
And then we're into the strings.
So we're going to pause here, but maybe what we would do to wrap this up is we've just talked about practicing with more friendly numbers as just a way to just share some thinking. Just look at these numbers on the screen and how that would be strength training for students to really get more confident in their use of a strategy as they move towards sophistication or efficiency in their mathematical thinking.
Mm-hmm. I think it all depends on your students, right?
Absolutely.
Like this first one could be 6 times 2 and then 3 times 2, right? Like depending on the level of understanding your students are.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure you're focusing where they're at and supporting them and then challenge them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So students who are here on this page, maybe grade 6. Maybe grade 7.
Maybe.
This is like in the numbers talks book, there's for so developing partial products, there would be page 1, page 2, page 3. This is page 3, the challenge, where you're getting into challenges, and kids have been doing number talks for a long time. If we could go down to slide 50.
So let's go to there.
Can we go there? 50.
Which,
so we're gonna go. Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah, the strings are from number talks.
Yeah.
Or there's other places too.
Yes.
Which we will focus in on another day.
Yeah. So we want to honor everybody's time.
Yep.
Sorry, just leaning back too far. We want to honor everyone's time. So we wanted to walk through these 5 things. So I think we got through 4 of them.
Yep.
You know, hopefully that was helpful. I love what Mike just shared in the chat, which is the continuum is truly about number sense.
Yes.
And just confidence in how we interact with numbers.
Yeah, it's our roadmap in the.
Yeah.
I like to think of it almost as a DRA. Like, so we're DRAing our kids. We get to know where they are in math.
Yeah.
It creates a more balanced math program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the idea of a continuum is really about, diagnose or diagnostic is maybe too formal, but just like you said, knowing where they are and then
how to move them.
Yeah.
Hey, to be on brand, I'll say where to next.
Well, today, maybe our participants will join us on Twitter. Is there where
That'd
to
be
next?
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got some images that we're going to post up.
Yeah.
On Twitter, we're going to use this LKX path.
For LK multiplication path.
Yes.
All right.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
And I'll just say whether or not they participate today by connecting with that LK launch 19 tag, this whatever it is you post, whether people are able to on a Friday be able to contribute or not, it's going to be there, and they'll be able to contribute sort of at their leisure. And it's possible that tag might exist throughout the school year that people could slowly contribute to it. But it's glad to know that this conversation is going to continue. I think I watching this session, all I could get was there is such tremendous rapport amongst the three of you as presenters. I think you played off one another beautifully. And the authentic problem solving you built into the front of the session with that audio thing was genius.
It was a plan.
Yeah.
I put a faulty mic to Sally to begin to just see how it worked.
Well, but the fact that you could get it to work sometimes and not work sometimes, that's a real art.
Oh yeah.
Because if it was just not working, we'd have just gone off.
Rod, we're not rookies here.
Well, it was terrific.
Totally
I just,
intentional.
on behalf of everyone in the audience, especially the people who participated in the chat, and big shout out to Lisa for using her microphone.
Yeah, way to go, Lisa, Hyde Park.
Thanks to the whole team for this presentation. And I'll remind everyone that beyond the Twitter chat, the recording of this, and I'll play with the audio a little bit on the audio version, it'll be available online. So you can certainly follow up with this discussion and this presentation with future ones. But maybe this is a good time to say thanks to everybody. And I'm going to give Ben the chance to thank everybody who participated in this discussion, but also the other things that took place earlier this week.
So, the only reason this happens is because people come out and engage, and that's everyone in our community. And, I think we're just so fortunate, and I'm so grateful for the teaching community that we have in Lambton, Kent, and beyond for coming out and engaging and showing up and really making this a success. We keep saying, if you're at a workshop, if you've got 30 people, that's a huge number. If you've got 20, it's full. So the fact that we've been doing that all week from our back decks and our pools and prioritizing kind of thinking and learning and collaborating and sharing, I really appreciate that from participants. But I'm going to say two things. It can't happen without the teachers who help co-present and our instructional coaches and program staff who really took this and went on. And the other person it really couldn't have happened without is Rod in the background, helping us out, just making sure that things are smooth and letting us, like a day like today is a perfect example of it, is that, he's on the back end working. We're trying to keep content going, but it means that our mind can be on what it should be on, which is sharing. So I just want to say it's been super heartening, and I'm very grateful for everyone's participation. It's been beyond what we had hoped it would be.
Well, I think it's a great segue to the regular school year. A great way to end the summer. It's kind of a transition. Big thanks and congratulations to everybody.
And I guess Hyde Park gets treats.
Awesome.
Jeez. It's recorded.